السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بداية نشكر جمعية المهندسين البحرينية على إقامة هذا المؤتمر، ونشكر الحضور الكريم وكذلك متحدثينا الكرام. اليوم عندنا 4 متحدثين. السيدة بولا بوست اعتذرت بسبب دواعي صحية، نتمنى لها الشفاء العاجل. معنا اليوم المهندس عبد الله حسن من هيئة الربط الكهربائي لدول مجلس التعاون، والسيدة شيرل كيرنز from Towers and Hamlins، والمهندس جون بارنز from إسماعيل خنجي Associates، والمهندسة هدى الجوعان شركة ليو لخدمات مسح الكميات. أول متحدث عندنا اليوم المهندس عبد الله. جاهز ولا؟ Engineer Abdullah Hassan is our first speaker. Engineer Abdullah Hassan is the head of maintenance at the Gulf Cooperation Council Interconnection Authority with bachelor degree in electrical engineering. Abdullah Hassan has over 25 years experience in maintenance and asset management of high voltage equipment. He worked with Electricity and Water Authority from 1987 to 2008, Kingdom of Bahrain, and asset management of 400 kV GCC IA network. He was associated with the project management of phase 1 and phase 3 of 400 kV interconnection between GCC member states. He has been actively involved in various committees such as GCC Maintenance and Asset Management Committee, SIGRE Study Committee, SIGRE working groups related to online partial measurement and reliability of auxiliary supply in substation. تفضل مهندس.
Okay, شكرا. Good afternoon, everybody. Actually, today my presentation, I will present a case study. It's related to 400 kV cable project connecting Kingdom of Saudi Arabia with Kingdom of Bahrain. And I will present actually what is the GCCIA, just very brief overview. And then I will describe the nature of the project. And then what is the claim petition which was filed against GCCIA. And then GCCIA response. And finally, the DAP decision. To start with, I will give you a very overview of the GCCIA. It's a 400 kV grid connecting 6 GCC countries. Actually, it starts from North Kuwait, where we have a connecting substation connecting to MEW transmission network. And as you go south in Al-Fadhili substation, we have a very big premises called HVDC converter station, which connect the 60 Hz side with 50 Hz side, with the total capacity of 1,800 megawatt. As you go further down, there is a cable connection to Bahrain. And this is the subject of our presentation, and I will come back to it later on. Further south, the network connects to UAE, Oman, and Qatar. What is the benefit of this network is actually provide support to all GCC members in case of emergency. It has been in service now for 9 years, and it has proven its reliability and availability. Since commissioning, we have never had any underload shedding, and we have avoided many cases of potential partial blackout. Because now all the GCC network is like one robust network because of the connection. At the present, from the emergency support, GCCIA has a plan to go for commercial exchange of power. We are creating a common platform. We are creating an exchange. So all the transmission company among the member states can trade power among each other and beyond purely on commercial basis. So the project which we will discuss today It's called Saudi to Bahrain 400 kV system. The contract is based on FEDEC condition, plant and design built. And it is a delivery, manufacturing, construction of 2 circuits. That means there will be 6 cables in the sea, 3 for each phase. And we have 2 fiber optic cable, 1 fiber optic per circuit. The contract value was $343 million and duration 5 years. GCCIA is the employer and we have a consultant, and the contractor is a consortium of 2 major manufacturers from Europe. Here the map shows the route of the cable. From the other side you will see the landing point from Saudi side. And then you have a very long submarine cable landing at al-Na'san Island, and then further into Bahrain connecting to Jasra substation. So it's a mix of majority of submarine cable and some small parts, which is the landing point and the final mile connection, it is underground cable. But all of them is oil-filled cable. What is the basis of the claim? The consortium claim against GCCIA that they are entitled for additional compensation due to soil condition of the sea. Number 2, that they are entitled for extension of time for the affected works. And they want to be compensated for all the costs they have incurred due to the DAB procedures. GCCIA specification says the cable has to be buried under the seabed with a target depth of 1 meter. And during the clarification and during the pre-award and during the tender, it has handed over a survey which says the proposed route, which I've showed you, has no obstacles. You can use it to prepare the tender, and the seabed is all sand along the cable route. The contractor, after the award, they did their own detailed survey. They discovered 60% of the seabed is rock, 40% is sand, 60% rock. And they claim they have costed their proposal based on sand seabed, which makes a big difference actually. When you have sand, you can do water jetting to open a trench and lay the cable. When you have rock, it's totally different operation. You can see here as a sample of the cable, when it lands to the sea, it is spread actually. It's around 50 meters between each phase. A total of 300 meters, that is our corridor. And the different color reflects the type of the seabed. For example, the red one is the sea rock. The less red one is, you can say, a mix of sand and other stony material. So due to this change, they have to use rock trenching instead of jetting. So they have to bring a special machine from Europe, lower it in the sea, and then crack the trench by rock trenching machine. And they have to use actually anchoring piles, because the sand pile is not anymore valid, so they have to use anchoring piles. And the barge, which was supposed to be hired locally, is not used anymore, so they have to bring a barge from Europe, more maneuvering and more suitable for this type of seabed. Just to be more clarity, this is a picture of the barge. You can see this is the King Fahd Causeway, and this is the barge. And at the end of it, this is where they lower the cable into the sea. And you can see from 3 sides, these are called anchoring piles. We use this to stabilize it against the tide and to direct it so the cable can be lowered exactly on the trench as per the coordinates which has been provided in the as-built drawing. Another picture on the other side, when they lower the cable, it is floated on the sea with the floats, and then you have divers. They guide the cable, they assist to place the cable in the trench. So it's a very big operation, very slow operation. And then because of the change between the first survey report and the detailed survey report, they have to go through these changes. So the consortium referred this change to FIDIC clauses. And they summarize 4 FIDIC clauses that proves, as they claim, that they are entitled for additional compensation. Number 1, they say GCCIA provided inaccurate information. So the setting out data, which is in sub-clause 4.7, is valid. Number 2, there is error in employer requirement. Both of them refer to the first survey report, that it was inaccurate and it has some errors actually. So they say sub-clause 1.9 applies. The third point, they say we have been subjected to unforeseeable condition because of your survey report, a condition which we could have not avoided and we could have not prevented also. So when they mobilized everything, they saw the seabed is totally different condition than the data which was provided due to this change. In addition, they made a claim. The engineer rejected. They say, as per FIDIC, clause 3.5, the engineer determination and failed to act fairly and independently to reach an agreement between the parties. So as a conclusion, they have requested that the consortium has the right to adjust the contract price, and they are entitled for extension of time because of the inaccuracy of the data, and they want to be compensated for all the costs they have paid due to DAP procedure. So this is the end of the consortium claim. Now I move to GCCIA reply. GCCIA actually went through all the sophistication procedure which happened during the tender, from pre-qualification, from clarification, from pre-award, all the minutes of meeting, from evaluation, and they cited some recorded data. One of them, for example, that the consortium raised concern about that survey report, but in the meeting they withdrew their conservation about the accuracy of the report. The second one, they made him to issue a statement which says they are fully technical and commercial compliant with the employer requirement. So these were minuted in the pre-award meeting. Another argument, they say the report was very simple, it was not deep, and it was meant to help the vendors to establish the visibility of the proposed route. You cannot float a tender without any proposed route in the sea. So you have to tell them this is the proposed route, and this is a very interim survey report which can assist you in preparing your tender. And as per the sub-clause 5.19.2, they have the obligation to do their own detail. This is written in the scope of work without any additional. They have the obligation to do a detailed survey report, and they are fully responsible to do this and satisfy themselves of the actual surface of the seabed. So this argument was related to the survey report. So that means the survey report did not relieve the consortium from actually considering their vast experience. They are very experienced in this field and they do a lot of projects, submarine cable. Considering this experience, they should have catered that there is a chance for a different soil, and they should have put a provision for this contingency in their proposal. So the engineer rejected. They say different soil condition doesn't constitute the ground to accept a claim for additional payment. And GCCIA fulfilled FIDIC 4.7 in terms of setting out data. And there was no error, actually, because the purpose was explained that this is to confirm there is no obstacle, and the report was accurate in this sense. There was no cable crossing, no pipeline crossing, no big object which can avoid laying on the proposed. So in that sense, the report was accurate. Only the accuracy was under question, which is the type of the seabed. So final part, I'll go to the DAB decision. The DAB analysis says the difference found between the survey report submitted by GCCIA and later on the actual condition of the seabed encountered is not considered errors. And this is the terminology used in FIDIC. So they have not considered it as error. And then for two reasons. Because there was a common understanding between the two parties that this report is an interim to help them prepare the tender. And there was a more detailed survey was to be done to use it in design and construction. So this part of the 5 minutes. So this part of the DAP decision was in line with the GCCIA argument that it is not an error and they have met the FIDIC condition in that regard. However, there was an agreement between the party, and it is written also in the FIDIC and also in the contract. If the difference is substantial, then the consortium has the right for additional claim. And the DAB has concluded that the criteria has met. The difference of the condition of the seabed from the initial report comparing to the detailed report is substantial, and they are entitled for price correction. They also recommended that quantification is not part of this case, and they recommended to agree between the party the quantities because it's a longer process and it will cost a lot of money. So finally, this case was agreed between the party on agreed quantification. With regard to the third request, the DAB says all the cost due to DAP procedure has to be shared between the two parties on equal basis. So the final decision, consortium is entitled for additional compensation, and consortium is entitled for additional time, and the consortium is not entitled to be compensated by GCCIA for contractor cost in relation to DAP procedure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Abdullah, for finishing before the time. It's a well-presented presentation about GCC interconnecting case study. And we have our second speaker is Ms. Cheryl Kearns from Towers and Hamlins. She's going to talk about construction projects navigating the claims main field. Cheryl Kearns is a partner in Towers and Hamlin's International Construction Team and has been based in the region since 2007, working across all of the firm's Middle East offices, which include Bahrain, Oman, and the UAE. Cheryl provides contract advisory services for all aspects of construction, engineering, and oil and gas projects, especially those procedure on EPC basis, to employers, main contractors, specialist contractors, and engineers and architectural consultant. Cheryl has extensive experience of advising upon procurement issues, amendment to readdress the balance of risk and standard from in practical FEDEC and bespoke building contracts, consultancy agreements, and form of ancillary security relation to significant international infrastructure and development projects. Cheryl also frequently advises clients, both claimants and respondent, in relation to construction dispute resolutions, which includes amicable settlement assistance, drafting settlement agreements, mediation disputes, education, board, and arbitration proceeding conducted under various arbitration rules, ICC, LCIA, UNCITRAL, ADC, ACC, as well as being regularly appointed to sit as an arbitrator. Cheryl also holds a master's degree in construction law and is a member of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Faisal, for the introduction. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My talk today is going to look at some of the issues that you might want to consider when it comes to navigating the claims minefield that seems to arise on the majority of construction projects in the Gulf. In terms of the agenda, we'll look at the types of claims that arise on construction projects from both the employer and contractor perspective. We'll have some tips for the project team and the key importance of contemporaneous records. If you take anything away from today, it's really the importance of these, whether you're at a site meeting, in a settlement agreement, or end up before a tribunal of 3 arbitrators. It's really going to come down to the quality of documentation that you have. We'll then look at some issues around defending a claim and then focus on 2 of the issues that tend to drive most of the claims in the region, namely variations and delay. So in terms of claims on construction projects, if you're a contractor, the types of claims that you would be looking to mount and pass up the chain to the employer tend to be claims for varied and additional works. So where you're alleging that you're being asked to perform something that is out with the originally contemplated contract or contract sum. Claims for extension of time, prolongation, and disruption claims are also extremely common in the region. That's where the contractor is looking for relief from the application of liquidated damages and for the original time to be extended. You may also have claims for unforeseen physical conditions. I was going to say that those are relatively uncommon in the region, but Abdullah's obviously just given a detailed case study on unforeseen conditions on site. But it's probably less common than, say, in the United Kingdom, where you have more utilities and services that happen to be in the ground. And if you're a contractor, you may also have types of measurement disputes. So that's where there's a dispute on what rate should be applied to a particular piece of work. Conversely, if you're the employer, you may also have claims against the contractor. Typically, those claims are either by way of deduction from sums that would otherwise be due or by set-off. Those are typically liquidated damages, where there is a claim that the contractor is in delay and where there's no relief by way of an extension of time. You might also have claims arising against the contractor if there are defective works. So that is in the instance where the works that have been completed do not conform to the contract or the specification. And then in circumstances where you've had a termination situation, so if you've had to terminate the contractor on site, there might also be claims for the additional costs of having to bring in a third-party contractor to complete that work. So if you do have one of those claims arising, if you're the contractor trying to bring that claim, or if you're the employer and receiving that claim, if you're the employer receiving that claim, these are the types of documentary evidence that you need in order to support your claim. Obviously, there's a tender, so the original contractor's tender and tender programme is often very useful evidence, particularly in relation to establishing how the contractor originally planned to undertake the works. The contract documents are going to be a key item, so the contract agreement, the conditions of contract, specification, bills of quantity, etc. Programme, also extremely important. Number of issues around programme. It's quite unusual to have that as a contract document. There can often be major disputes about having an agreed programme, an agreed baseline, but ideally a competent contractor will have his own internal programme that he is keeping to record progress against the works. Drawings, also very useful contemporaneous documents. You need to have records of the tender drawings, the shop drawings, and the as-built drawings, and that's going to be particularly useful evidence, particularly if you're running a variation claim. Instructions, very important to keep detailed records of these if they are in writing. If you receive instructions verbally, please confirm them, follow them up in writing. Instructions tend to give rise to variations, so it's important that we do have those documented. And then requests for information. It's important to put in any request for information, what it is you're after, when you need it by, and importantly, what the consequences are if you don't receive that information. Correspondence and minutes of meeting, obviously on very large projects, so projects, infrastructure projects that are running for 2, 3, 4 years, you're going to have a lot of correspondence. Minutes of meeting, also very important. If you receive a minute of meeting that's been drafted by someone else and you don't agree with the content, again, follow that up and put it in writing at the time. Notices, very important also. The FIDIC contracts forms that are used a lot out in the region, or bespoke versions based on FIDIC focus on notices quite a lot. Take it from me as a lawyer, we spend a lot of time arguing about whether or not notice has been served in accordance with the contract. It's much easier if it's just done at the outset, and you can avoid wasting lots of time and money arguing over whether or not the notice provisions have been complied with. Site records, progress reports, and photographs, all very useful as well. Photographs in particular, if you come to an arbitration hearing, you have 3 arbitrators that are coming to the project much later on, and photographs can really be useful in telling what the story of what happened on site. And then again, detailed financial and cost records, particularly the site records, and obviously your head office records as well. Now I appreciate that when people are on site, the main objective is obviously to complete the project, and keeping these types of record is really quite a large burden, as I've said, particularly on long build periods. Some of that burden can be lifted by you using and putting in place a good document management system at the very outset of the project, and perhaps thinking about having some stock letters that you can send that are in compliance with your contract. A lot of the time people sign a contract, put it in the drawer and forget about it, or it's only management that have visibility on what the terms are. So you really need to have your people that are on the ground, on site, aware of what those terms are. Witness evidence, very important. Who are the people that have first-hand knowledge? A lot of time people think it should be only the management, but often management is informed sort of second or third hand. It's far better to have the person who has mud on their boots, so to speak, giving evidence. And it's also important to get early expert evidence. On construction projects, there's probably going to be a large technical element. So you may need an engineering expert, a delay analysis, or quantum expert. And early technical input is advised because the good experts are busy. And also, you want to know the merits of your case. There's no point spending lots of time and money on a dispute if ultimately an expert cannot support your position and a tribunal is not going to find in your favour. If you receive a claim, your priority is obviously going to be to try and defeat it in its entirety. Whilst that would be ideal, there's actually very limited circumstances in which you can do that, unless you have an instance where the claim's been brought in the wrong forum. So for instance, if it's in breach of an arbitration agreement, if there's some kind of time bar or limitation issue, but that's relatively rare in this region because that tends to compete with the principle that a just claim doesn't expire. There might be some kind of fundamental difficulty with the claim, you started proceedings against the wrong party, or there may be some failure to comply with notice requirements or some other precondition of the contract. So with that in mind, the majority of claims are really likely to involve some element of a genuine dispute. Generally, contractors bring disputes where there is some entitlement to additional payment. That said, the amount that's put in claims by contractors does tend to be slightly inflated. But where there is a genuine claim, it's highly likely that some money will be due. So with that in mind, I really recommend that you try and ascertain as early as possible what the likely outcome of the case is going to be. It's helpful to make a short summary of the key differences between the parties and focus on where the money is. So if the highest preponderance of value is based in a couple of the claims, then the other smaller items can be set aside or compromised. And I also recommend always considering settlement. I had a lot of clients who don't want to consider settlement. They see it as a sign of weakness, or they don't want to try and settle too early. But what I would say in response to that is if you settle it between the parties, then you are really the driver of the outcome, and you can control the outcome. If you end up in a dispute situation where you're having an outcome imposed on you by a judge or an arbitrator, you may not like the end result. And just always be careful if you are discussing settlement to consult with your in-house or your external legal team, because obviously English law concepts without prejudice don't exist out in this region. Just to brief focus on variations, Bahrain, like any jurisdiction, a lot of the construction claims tend to arise from variations. What is or isn't a variation is actually a really tricky question, which is why it gives rise to so many disputes. I put the definition up there that's from the FIDIC Fourth that lists out what they consider to be a form of variation or a change. So it's something that changes the form, the quality, or the quantity of the work. Variations cause a lot of issues, so why bother having them? Well, it really preserves the contract whilst allowing changes to be made. And that's quite important, particularly if you've got a long build period. Some of the very large infrastructure periods have minimum build periods of sort of 36 onwards months. So that gives the employer some flexibility, and it also gives him a mechanism to actually instruct changes, because if that mechanism wasn't there, the contractor could say, actually, it's not in the contract, I don't fancy doing that. And it also ensures the contractor is actually going to get paid for additional work that he does. And it allows the employer to have the same or similar work carried out at relatively similar or pre-agreed prices or rates. And it also ensures that the contract isn't frustrated. For instance, if it becomes impossible to do a certain aspect of the works, those works can be varied. So if you do receive a claim for variations, these are the questions that you would normally ask. If you're a contractor putting in a claim, or if you're an employer receiving a claim. Is what's being claimed as a variation already in the contract? If it is, then it's not a variation, if it's already covered within the contract and the original contract sum. Does the contract actually allow variations? Normally, a good contract should have a mechanism for that process. And then can work be deleted or omitted? Remember, variations aren't just about increasing work. You can also delete or omit work. That's generally in the situation where the employer doesn't want that work performed at all. It's not there to be used to take the work away from the contractor and to give it to someone else for a cheaper price. Generally, that's a breach of contract because the contractor will have a legitimate expectation to undertake that work. Is there any notice provisions, and is the contractor entitled to be paid? What is he entitled to be paid? Are there rates? Are there any conditions precedent? So often the employer will have to give the go-ahead to the contractor to actually undertake the variation, otherwise it may be at the contractor's risk. And then you need to look at the provisions about how do you go about valuing the variation. Ordinarily they will be rates if you have a bill of quantity, but there may be issues surrounding that. And then just a brief focus on delay, which is also one of the key drivers of claims in this region. If you are a contractor, typically these are issues on the slide that would occur that may give rise to you putting in a request for an extension of time. And it might be one or a combination of these issues. So if the employer is instructing variations, issuing hundreds of instructions, if there are delays to your access to site, if the employer is delaying approvals to drawings, those types of examples, things that are holding you up as a contractor from doing your work. And if you are the employer and you receive correspondence with any of these items, beware, because it's likely to be the beginning of a claim for an extension of time. But as the employer, if you receive a claim for an extension of time, the questions you're going to be asking yourself are the events, the delay events that are being relied on by the contractor, the true drivers of delay? Or if you're the employer, these are the types of issues that you would want to consider. Actually, is what driving the delay, is the contractor under-resourced? Does he not have enough labour on site? Has he just underestimated entirely the amount of time it's going to take to complete? Is he being late with design approvals? Is there late procurement, particularly of long lead items of equipment? Is there defects in the work? Is he having to do rework and that's what's taking the time? And does he have issues with his own subcontractors and suppliers? So if you're the employer, these are the types of issues that you want to look at if you receive an extension of time claim. In terms of delay and assessment of it, these are the tools up in the slide that you would typically look to use in your assessment. And again, that goes back to what we discussed earlier and the real key importance of contemporaneous documents and keeping really good site records during the currency of the works. In terms of analysing the delay, it's preferable to get an outside, either if you have the capability in-house. But certainly most of the major claims consultancies can assist with a forensic examination of the project documents. In terms of the delay analysis that's thank you. In terms of the delay analysis that's undertaken, there may be contract requirements that specify a particular form. That's relatively uncommon, but we do have one client at the moment where the method of delay analysis is actually specified in the contract, and their claim for an extension of time has been rejected entirely on that basis because the methodology doesn't conform to the contract requirements. If there's no methodology specified, then you need to have a think about, well, what best fits with the project and the timing of the project. So if you're submitting your claim during, the works are ongoing, then you probably want to look at something more akin to a time impact analysis. Whereas if you come to the end of the project and there's as-built data available, then you probably want to look at more something as planned versus as-built. Your analysis of delay will also depend on what supporting records are available and the quality of those records. And it will also depend upon the time that you have available to actually do that analysis, particularly if it's, as I say, a very long project. So just to sum up, ensure that all of your key personnel are aware of the relevant contract provisions. So not just management, the people on site really need to know and have an understanding of what the contract requires. Actually use your contract as a tool. As I said, there's quite a big tendency to assume the contract might say one thing when it says another, or to just simply put it in the drawer and forget about it whilst the works are ongoing. A document management system is really useful. I'd recommend putting that in place and using it and making sure it's constantly updated. Be vigilant for claims and report them at the earliest possible opportunity. Again, there's a habit of leaving things to the end of the project. To my mind, that doesn't help anyone because by the end of the project, the gulf between the parties can be very large and it can be very difficult to overcome that. And then just avoid advancing unmeritorious claims. So don't inflate your claims, focus on claims that actually have merits. and they will be less likely to be rejected. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon, for a well-navigated speech. Our next speaker is John Barnes. His paper is about dispute avoidance and management, the independent project health check. John Barnes, associate at IKA. John has over 26 years experience in the construction industry, working in the Middle East, Hong Kong, and the UK. He has provided traditional civil and marine engineering designs, construction supervision services, contract administration, and claims and dispute management advice, and has worked for consultants, contractors, and employers. He has a Bachelor of Civil and Structural Engineering from Sheffield University and a Master of Construction, Law, Arbitration, and Education from the Robert Gordon University, and is a member of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. He is also a chartered member and a fellow of the Institution of Civil Engineers and is the ICE representative for Bahrain. John has major claims experience in both the Middle East and Hong Kong. He has worked on a number of high-profile infrastructure and marine disputes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, in the next 20 minutes, what I'm hoping to present to you today is what I consider to be an underutilised and economic tool for dispute avoidance. It's called the Project Health Check. They're not new. Project Health Checks have been around for a long time. They take up many forms and have different outcomes. I'm going to present my opinion on how they could be applicable to the GCC. I'm going to first of all explain roughly what a project health check is, the forms which I think it could take in the GCC, who the project health check is for, who could it be applicable to, why it would be useful in the GCC. I'm going to then look at reasons perhaps why it's not used widespread in the GCC, and then I'll just conclude with would projects benefit from project health checks? And if they could, how could they be implemented in the GCC? Okay, so the first point about what is a project health check. A project health check is an analogy, or you can make an analogy with a personal health check. The idea is to deal with issues before they become major issues. Early treatment of issues at source, as a relatively small, and avoid them escalating into major issues and disputes. So basically, we're trying to avoid claims and disputes with intervention at an early stage. Okay? So in a nutshell, what are they? A project health check is a constructive, independent project review of issues, potential issues, and the presentation of potential solutions at an early stage in a project or at multiple stages along the project. It could even be a single project health check at an appropriate time. What the independent project health check gives you is a clear pair of eyes by appropriate qualified people and experienced people for either a single party to a contract or for multiple parties in a contract. Okay. There is no set format for a project health check. In fact, the benefit is if you tailor the project health check to suit the outcome of what you're looking for. Okay. What it presents at the end of the day is an honest, impartial report to senior management. Senior management often don't get the right information to resolve issues. They get the wrong information and make the wrong decisions. So the idea is you get these health checks along the different stages of the project, then you can make informed decisions, and again they're impartial and they're delivered by an independent person. So he's able to say if you're under-resourcing a project, it's the actual senior management that are making an error, he's able to say that without fear of reprisals. Okay, what is a health check? So it's in this presentation, we tailor the project health check when it comes to dispute avoidance to look at the contractual, commercial aspects of a project, i.e. the contract itself, the risks that contracts presents to the different parties, how they've been transferred and if that's correct, the progress and the time of the works. Time is often overlooked. I think in the GCC it's a very valuable commodity. If you lose time, you lose money. And of course, they also focus on the financial issues of the contract. Project health checks are not just for commercial issues, they can cover a whole range of things, general performance, quality and health and safety issues. But what we'll be looking at as a dispute avoidance tool is the commercial aspects, contractual and commercial aspects. Okay. As with personal health checks, we're not trying to say these are straightforward. They're generally complex. The success is dependent on many factors. So the doctor and patient relationship and the analogy is an important relationship. As with project health checks, the relationship of the reviewer with the client is important. If they don't get along, they're never going to get along, it's not going to be successful. The experience and qualifications of the health checker, as with the doctor, is also similarly important. The guy doing the health check must have the relevant experience to be able to identify risks and potential disputes before they arise. Yeah. An appropriate mindset. So everybody has to enter into this as it's a proactive tool to avoid claims. It's not a tool to actually raise claims. So the mindset should be on claims avoidance rather than on claims creation. Yeah. And last of all, as I mentioned before, the health check has to be suitable for the outcome. So at different stages of the project, at the start you'll be looking at the contract. As the project goes on, you'll be looking at the progress and the reasons for deviations from progress and the minor differences that are arising. So the project health check has to be tailored to meet the particular time and the particular project. Yeah. So, as I've said, there's many forms of project health check, and this is my opinion on how they could be rolled out in the GCC. And you take up a three-stage approach where you'd go into a project and you'd start with the project review where you'd gather all the main project control data. So you'd look at the plan, the original plan, you'd take the plan, the contract, the commercial plan, the programme, and then you'd start to look at the actual records against it. Review all the project controls, the programme, the commercial plan, as I said, the administration, is it being administered properly by all sides? Are letters coming in? Are they being addressed in an appropriate manner? Are registers in place to record things? Is information available? So are the drawings there? Can the contractor do the works? On the other side of the coin, has the consultant or the client received the programme? Has he received accurate method statements? Are notifications given? And then last of all, you have to look at the contract and its robustness to deal with that particular project. So these are all the raw data you'd gather in initial stage one. Stage two, you'd then analyse the data, so the findings and recommendations. You'd look at the plan data. Are they realistic? Was the programme realistic? Was the budget realistic? That would give a reason, if it's not, why things maybe not going to plan. And then you'd look at the actual performance. Are things ahead? Are they behind? And perhaps start to feel why they're not going ahead. All this kind of information on why things are not going as planned are indications of potential disputes. These can be raised and then hopefully actioned. So we'll look at the risks as well, key risks of the contract, what the risks are at an early stage, and to try and stop them developing to major risks and then to disputes. Yeah. Now, a key point in the GCC, I think, is interactive discussions. So at stage two, you not only gather the data and analyse the data, you speak to all the people, all the key people involved. Like if you spoke to a contractor and asked him why he's behind programme, you'd have a different answer than the engineer and the client. Even within an organisation, if you ask someone what's going wrong, you'd get a different answer from the boss than you would from someone down the chain. So you speak to these people and you're able to actually make an impartial, informed decision on what's going on. So that from stage two, you then get a draft report of what you think your findings and recommendations with, how you deal with what should be minor issues at this point, and you then take them to the senior management. So again, senior management in terms of the Middle East, GCC, they don't have a lot of time to spend looking at a 200-page report. The key aspect is to pre-book a 30-minute slot with him and go through the findings, the main findings, and with your recommendations. Again, as I said before, these could be pretty negative to him, and that's what the benefit of an independent health check is. He's not going to shoot the postman. You're not going to get sacked for it, or hopefully not. Okay, so which parties would benefit from a project health check? Well, initially you could do it as individual parties. So the client or a contractor or a designer could instigate a public health check to look at all the things I've said. And in this context, it's more of a project management tool to improve delivery of projects for that particular party. So a ministry could go through a number of its projects and have health checks on all those projects or on one particular project and see what the problems are and try and address those problems. Okay. What it provides is an independent specialist view to the project team and to the senior management on the state of their projects and where they stand. It's an early warning mechanism. You've got a specialist looking at it who specialises in contract and commercial and time issues, and he can offer views on where he thinks things may go wrong and where they are going wrong. And another key aspect is it gives a snapshot of an independent factual record of the project status. So if there's things that are going behind programme and you've got a record of why this independent expert thinks you're behind programme, that is something you can either take to your boss or maybe present to the contractor if you're a client, or even if you're a contractor, present to the client and say, look, these are the real issues. We've had this from an independent person. Okay, my main drive today would be hopefully to introduce project health checks as an actual contract requirement and write them into the contract. The drafting would be important. You'd have to specify how the structure, how the project health plan would take form. You'd have to specify what each party would have to disclose. So having a project health check written into a contract at various stages every few months, it would give all the parties an independent view of the status of the contract. They're relatively cheap to do. So the clients, contractors and consultants could have an independent information on the status of the contract and why things are not perhaps going as they should be. So they're based on facts, areas of risk and concern are raised, and it gives an opportunity to action them at that point. So each party gets the facts. Of course, they might not agree with them all, but they do get an opportunity there to act on it. A potential window to resolve disputes. So if there's a dispute arising, you've got an independent person who's looked at this dispute and says, yes, under this clause of the contract, it looks like there is some validity. Why don't we sit down and resolve it? If it's written into the contract, you could actually write in that at this time you could have a brief mediation period to try and resolve issues. Okay? And again, as we said, it provides an independent timeline of project status. So if you've got an independent review at 3 or 4 occasions across the contract where an independent person's run the status, the key points, and why they're not being addressed or who should be addressing them, when it comes to a major dispute, if anything evolves into a major dispute, such as arbitration, the arbitrator has a record, an independent record of the status and why people haven't actioned them, and perhaps even why they have, and who's perhaps to blame a bit more. So those are kind of records. I think arbitrators, when they get to go to disputes, they generally lack records and information. As a last thing, they can improve efficiencies. So if major risks or major deviations or even small deviations are raised, they can be addressed at that time, preventing project overruns and associated costs. Okay, so why are they particularly useful in the GCC? Well, in the GCC, I think the environment is rife for disputes. We see lots of disputes over the last 15 years or so. I don't see anything changing. Most contracts, as we've heard several times today, are based on FIDIC, which is a very adversarial contract, and it looks like that's going to continue for the foreseeable future. Around the world, we've seen different attitudes adopting, where more forms of collaboration contracts and partnering are coming into play. It doesn't seem to be taking hold in the GCC. On top of that, the GCC is pretty susceptible to volatile issues such as rising oil prices, VAT, labour restrictions. All these things one change overnight can have a massive effect on a project in terms of its viability, turning profit into loss. This is an atmosphere for dispute. So in the long run, I see that disputes will continue, and we think we need a useful tool to try and reduce them and manage them. Another issue in terms of disputes and how independent project health checks can help out is commercial pressures on all the parties to the contract in what is a very competitive market. Means that everybody's looking after their own interests. They've got minimal margins for success. They don't really have much contingency to accommodate other people's opinions or even their own errors. So there's a lot of pressure in terms of progressing works, and when they don't go wrong, the pressure is to raise claims and try and get that money back. Okay? Again, independent project health check can identify what I would call a natural personality differences. Contractors, people who work for contractors, generally have a different mindset and personality than clients and even engineers. You get natural conflicts in contracts where people just simply don't like each other. Little things get blown out of control. If you can identify that at an early stage and address it, it prevents this snowball effect. Okay? Another major issue in terms of, I think, disputes arising is that you get conflicts of interest, or whether through conflicts of interest, ignorance, or fear of reporting bad news to your boss, the wrong information gets to the decision makers. They don't really know if the contractor's correct, if the consultant's telling the right thing, or even his own staff are informing him correctly. Okay? It's not in everyone's interest for an engineer to report to the client that the works are delayed if he hasn't issued the drawings. He'd rather say that he's not mobilised to site. And similarly, the contractor would say the same thing. He can't mobilise to site. He makes stories up about that he hasn't got all the information yet. And it's very difficult for clients to understand who's correct. With a project health check, you can get a bit of analysis of that early. Another issue is firefighting, insufficient resource allocation. So a lot of projects, again, financial pressures, the resources allocated to the job are probably not enough, so they end up firefighting the important things. The small commercial issues that are simmering in the background are not getting the attention they deserve, and they get out of hand, and before you know it, there's delays and costs associated with it, and you've got a claim and a dispute. Okay, last thing in terms of management, what I call rose-tinted management. Again, this can be picked up in the project health check. People involved in projects get too close to them. They don't recognise the danger signs that things are going wrong. It's very difficult for people to admit their project is failing because generally it's a poor reflection on themselves. They'd rather hope that things are going to turn around, and maybe they will, so report everything is sort of okay, rather than actually acknowledge things. They get detached from reality. They can't see the danger signs. They don't know the obvious danger signs that this is a major dispute. So small issues, you reject them because you don't consider them important, baseless, or you think they're not critical at some point. They might be concurrent with other issues. You make a decision, then you leave it alone, and then all of a sudden the things are snowballing out of control. It's difficult to go back and tell your boss that you were wrong and reverse issues. So these again will be picked up hopefully in the project health check. And back to the point, all this culminates in the right people, the people at the high level that make these decisions on major issues have been misinformed right up to a point where they've made the wrong decisions because of this wrong information, and they get entrenched then in their position because, again, they find it difficult to change their views. So a specialist independent eye at an early stage or at a different stage within the project is able to observe these things and say, hey, stop guys, this needs a bit of action. Okay, why are they not used in the Middle East? Well, there's several reasons. I've just picked out 5 really. Ignorance. I don't think a lot of people know about project health checks. Perceived unnecessary management. So I think a lot of people may think, right, we don't use these project health checks, why do we need them? It's just another layer of project management. Another thing is obviously budget. They do cost money. You know, maybe you can spend that money on another 20 square metres of land or on the project. Why waste it on a public project health check? Another reason is poor application. Sometimes they're ineffective if they're not operated by experienced people. As I said, the right people have to be qualified for the right thing. I'm not a safety expert. I wouldn't try to do a project health check on a safety thing. Okay? And again, the project health check must be tailored to the project. Misplaced belief. So a lot of people think, yeah, okay, if we might get a few problems on this project, he's a good client or he's a good contractor, we've got a good record with them, these issues arise, we can take care of it, we'll give you some more work, and you've got a kind of faith in that you're some kind of deal maker. Obviously, when things go really wrong and disputes do arise, those things tend to fall away and you've got major differences. If these things could have been picked up at an early stage, there's no need for deal making. Just follow the contract and good management. Okay, and the last thing is time. Difficult to get time with senior managers. Big reports, as I said, don't cut the mustard. You need time with these guys. So project health check, wrap it all up in a half-an-hour presentation. Say this is where you're going wrong. These are the actions needed to avoid major disputes. Okay. In conclusion, would projects in the GCC benefit from project health checks? Yes, I think they certainly would, but they must be done properly. We've got a highly competitive and commercial market. You've got present economic volatilities that put projects at risk, and this results in construction disputes. They will continue. I'm pretty sure about that. Disputes are generally unsatisfactory to all parties. They're very expensive. The winners, even normally you have to pay quite a high price. And what I believe is an economic way to avoid these disputes, or many of them, is with a public health check. They're quite cheap, they can be done at stages, they're fact-based, they're independent, and they're impartial. Okay? And the recommendations come with them to resolve these issues at an early stage. Okay? The reasons for not adopting public health checks are not convincing, and I would suggest they should be challenged. Okay? If public project health checks are included in the contract, I think they're an economic way to avoid disputes. They give a real record of facts, snapshots along the way for subsequent arbitrators, if it comes to that case, to refer to. And just the threat of that or that presence should really give an incentive to resolve issues. Okay, and then last of all, how could they be implemented? I think this is a key point. John, they do need to be, just 3 lines. Okay. They do need to be implemented by qualified and experienced personnel. I don't think that there's a great system set up for that in the GCC yet. And the parties, the clients and the contractors would need to be receptive to it. Again, not too sure about, there's too many clients who have that right mindset. So what I would like to find is kind of trial projects with the right receptive clients, and we can apply the few qualified resources to a trial project, see the success from that, and then see, hopefully grow a little industry from that of project health checks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Our next speaker, after our speaker, will leave the floor for Q&A for anybody who wants to ask the speakers about their presentation. Our last speaker, last but not least, Engineer Huda Al-Jawan. She's going to talk about local dispute in small projects in Bahrain, common causes and remedies. She's a senior quantity surveying engineering and owner and managing director of Leo Quantity Surveying Services Company with limited liability. She is the first woman Bahraini and GCC quantity surveyor. She did BSc in quantity surveying and building economics in 1984 with the Ministry of Works scholarship. First woman quantity surveyor initiated this business. She did her higher national diploma in building construction option quantity surveying, UK 1981, Ministry of Works scholarship, diploma in building construction 1978, Gulf Polytech Bahrain, She has over 38 years experience in the field between the government and private sector and is a technical expert with Bahrain courts, at present merged with the Rawan Engineering Office. You can start.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. مساء الخير جميعا. يسعدني أن أكون معكم اليوم just to elaborate on some of my experience over this. Actually, today, this year I'm celebrating the 40 years of experience in the coast engineering field, quantity surveying. As we know, everybody knows that the construction is a risky business, and there's a lot of disputes arises right from day one of putting a plan, probably, up until we submit the project. Here today I will be focusing about three routes for causing disputes, which we should do before we reach the arbitration and the rest. Actually, we quantity surveyors, we do not recommend to reach a status where we go for arbitration. Rather, we prefer to be working in a proper team and do the things step by step. So the three routes, in my opinion, which causes disputes is A, the tender preparation process, B, the contract negotiation and signing, and 3, the stage of execution and stakeholders approach. One main remedy for such a situation is affording better transparency to the whole process of designing, tendering, and execution of small. Here today, I should have mentioned this in the beginning, I'll be just talking about the small projects, not the development of bigger ones. Because I feel that the bigger ones is more designed in a better way. Probably, maybe not, I'm not right, correct me if I'm wrong. So we should have a better transparency to the whole process of designing, tendering, and execution of small projects, and better protection for clients, because our aim, actually everybody aim, whoever works in a team, a construction team, is to safeguard the client as well as the contractors, because both are the parties of the economics. Of course, under the law, including the restoration of some provisions of. Here, I'll be talking about the provision of practice for engineering. I will show you later on what I mean by that. So if we talk about the first section, which is the tender preparation, number one, I feel from my experience, many smaller consultants do not employ experienced contract specialists and use form of contracts borrowed from projects or amend standard forms without regardless of the law practice. Number two, many smaller consultants do not produce a full design and rely on preferred subcontractors to do detailing and design. Such designs are inevitably devoid of the details required for a lump sum projects. Most of the projects which we do, at least in Bahrain, which I come across being a government employer, we do a lump sum projects. For any lump sum project, there should be certain criteria to follow. Accurate bill of quantities are rarely produced. I'm sorry to say this, but this is a fact actually. Accurate bill of quantities are rarely produced as consultants' fees are usually squeezed by clients, and this service is wrongly thought not to be important. Some of the consultants, let me just say it here, and my my colleagues do not misunderstand me, they do not employ a quantity surveyor or cost engineer right from day one, thinking that they can take the whole scenario and do it. And this is a wrong practice, of course. Smaller contractors as well do not have sufficient staff and rely on the poorly prepared bill of quantities. I'm not saying all, but at least many of them. Number 5, specifications as well. We'll talk about this a little bit. Specifications are usually poor coordinated. Uncoordinated sometimes, and have ambiguities which the contractor rarely spot during bid stage. Because why? And the lump sum bill of quantities or tenders, the risk is thrown on the contractor. At least let me talk about for example, in the government sector, we do prepare, we call it bill of quantities, but actually it's not bill of quantities, it's schedule of rates. And the schedule of rates consists, of course, of specification drawings as well as the bill. A lot of people, they understand it by calling it a bill. Here we throw the risk, or we used to throw the risk on the contractor. He has to study the drawings fully. He should be fully aware of the specification as well, and he should submit his bid accordingly. Later on, when we open the tenders, when we open the bids, any items which is missed, what we call calculated or priced, it is unfortunately it is the contractor's risk. And the last one here in this section is employers usually prefer to pick, again, the lowest tenderer and squeeze prices in the belief that the contractors' margins are larger than what they really are. Yani I have come across this. A lot of contractors, they just price it to win and do the project in accordance with the requirements. A practice encouraged in many cases by the consultants who, in the absence of quantity surveyor, QS has given too optimistic budget. Second part, which I feel it can lead to disputes again, is the practice of forcing, this is the contract negotiation and signing, the practice of forcing contractors to withdraw genuine qualifications or clarifications in order to hide design. This is probably, it is rarely happens actually in the government sectors. Maybe it can happen in the private sector. I have not worked a lot with that. Here, if it is not well designed, the contractor, when he gets to discover these mistakes and he brings it to the attention of the engineer or the architect that there is a mistake such and such and such, in some cases, unfortunately, the contractor is requested to withdraw in order to win. Later on, when I'm saying here, when we open the tenders, when we open the bids, and we go through and analyze, then we discover Mr. Contractor such and such, he discovers such and such, and he changed this to suit his, to suit the specification and drawings, and we tell him, not always, of course, sometimes, this is not acceptable, so he go and withdraw it, and later on he suffers. Second, smaller contractors usually have lack of knowledge. I'm sorry to say that, but this is true. Smaller contractors usually have lack of knowledge of the contractual implications, and this is very important. If anybody wants to submit a bid, he should be fully aware of the contractual implications of the tender, obligations, and are too trusting of those contractors too trusting of the consultant to be fair and free of conflicts of interest, and this is later on nobody will look into it actually. Last one is the consultants changing, again the consultants changing drawings at contract signing stage and incorporating modifications, etc. Discovered during the tender stage. This is also a bad practice. The last part is the execution stage. When we come now, it's time to execute the project. Contractor, number one, does not study the obligations and carries on his normal way, unaware of the consequences. Now I'm talking about the contractor at site. He's executing the work. He just go on carrying because he's got a certain time, and he, in his belief that if he is late, he will lose a lot of money and he will be punished or whatever. I don't like to use the word punishment, but unfortunately it's there. And he will be given a warning for not completing the project. However, we prefer, let me just elaborate here. Contractor is pressured. Again, this follows item number one. Contractor is pressurized or pressured to absorb and correct design mistakes and discrepancies, and not to write contractual letters. I'm sorry to say this, but I have come across a lot of such thing. The design, the owner or the employer, call it whatever you want, he make a lot of pressure on the contractor just to go. Even if the contractor brings any discrepancy or anything or any claim, let me call it, or notice, during the meetings, the regular meetings of the team, he will be asked, please just go ahead and correct and do the work, and at a later stage we will be looking into this, which comes very late. He should focus on writing contractual letters. There's no harm in writing it. Let the project be delayed. Let it be, and this is from my experience. But he has to safeguard himself by writing these letters. If he doesn't write them, it is, unfortunately, this is his risk. Number 4, consultants do not produce frequent cost reports. Very, very, very important. These cost reports, this give indications to the client of what is the status of the project, whether, are we in budget, are we below budget, are we over budget. So consultants do not produce frequent cost reports for their clients until it is too late, leaving a claim to resolve at the end of the project instead of resolution during execution. The claim, when it comes at the end of the day, when we are closing the project, is going to cost really, really a fortune. Nobody can afford it. None of the parties can afford it. Last part, which I would like to talk about, is here the practice, the regulating practice for the engineering practice. In the days, at least when I have started my working in the government sector, the CRPEP, the law, they have a law, of course. The law of the CRPEP, this is the engineering practice profession, stated that consultants was liable to third parties, i.e., what do we mean by the consultants? They can be contractors, suppliers, other consultants, etc. If he was negligent in the discharge of his duties, if he does anything, he is liable for the third party to consult. This provision was available to third parties to protect their interest in the event of abuse, in case he's been abused during the execution of the project, of the process, by negligent smaller consultants. With the new law nowadays, if my friends knows more about me who are working in the CIPP, please correct me. With the new law of regulating the practice, this is number 51, 2014, this safety provision has been removed. It should be put back again. The remedies. Number 1, I have done briefly 6. 1, direct appointment of direct independent cost consultant for all but minor projects to ensure that no conflicts of interest arise during the design and tendering stage. There is no chance that the quantity surveyor should be under the umbrella of the designer and supervisor. He should be independent. Consultants do not reduce their design, I'm just saying please not to do it. Consultants do not reduce their design obligations to suit their fees, but set their fees to do proper design service. Number 3, supervision. Consultants should be independent of the designer to ensure no conflicts again are hidden and buried in contractors' claims. Because once the contractor submits any claim at the end of the day, we, at least myself, we should feel that supervisor should be different from the designer, so we can at least go through properly. Number 5, all abnormal terms and conditions which are deviating from Bahrain Civil Code and internationally recognized terms of contract should be clearly and simply spelled out in bold. Everybody, the attention goes more on bold, of course, rather than the normal fonts, to the contractor so that he understands his obligations fully. It is not a good practice to hide obligations from the contractors, because they are the people who will face later on all the risks, and they are responsible about the projects from day 1 until 10 on the key. The last one, the provisions of law of CRPEP, again, regarding liabilities of consultants to third parties should be, I advise strongly here, should be reinstated and included under the new regulating practice, which was 51/2000. Thank you very much. Sorry if you have any questions. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Engineer Huda.
Thank you.
I want to thank all everybody about the full schedule and end of days. I thought I see many people left, but let me review about the points. We're talking today with Engineer Abdullah Hassan. We're talking about GCC interconnection network contract between Saudi and Bahrain Cable. The consortium claim based on what consortium statement of case response to claim petition. And almost Shirley, give me some points about claims of construction project, type of the project team, how to evidence a claim construction project, how do you defend a claim, and the variations. We're talking about variation order, what is the variation and why we have the variation. Contractor delay events, employer response to claim of delay. And we lifting to Engineer John Barnes, the project health check. What is a PHC form for the GCC? What is the PHC for? How to implement PHC in GCC? Who is the PHC for? And finally, with Engineer Huda Al-Ja'an, she divided to 3 areas about tender preparation, contract negotiating and signing, execution stage, and CRPEP law, and many points about this presentation. So if any question, please. Yes.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Mohammed Abbas from Mohammed Abdul Mohsen Karafi, a contractor company. I just want to ask what is variation? Does it include, because the definition of variation, does it include the scope of work in terms of items of the BOQ, or in terms of the concept, or in terms of any type of work has the same nature of what is mentioned in the contract? For example, we are doing like one infrastructure project. So we are, our main scope includes the permanent utilities for the village. So is it possible to give like on a later stage some of the public sector authorities should provide a temporary power supply or water supply, or like this? Yeah, it's like we are doing the utilities up to the interface point, then the other authority will provide this main power supply to same interface point, so the village will operate. So the other authority couldn't provide this main power supply or water supply on time, so we go to like a temporary solution. So we are instructed to do the temporary solution at that time with the same rates, because it has the same nature of work of our contract. This contract was priced like 3-4 years before then, because in public sector it will take too much time to study, then tender, make the tender, then make the bidding, like this. So at the end, if they are instructing us now to do the same temporary power supply or utility supply, we will follow the same prices which was given or which was priced like 5 years or 3 years ago in the tender stage. So is it valid? Is it a variation or it's not? It's not a variation because it was not in our contract to do temporary work or temporary power supply or water supply or any of this kind of work. At the same time, when we claim like it's an additional work or it's a variation, we have to claim, we have to submit new costs. They say, no, you have similar items, so you will pay according to the contract conditions. If any variation, similar items should be followed with same price.
It's clear about the time variation and the pricing about the time variation.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Shirley.
Okay, it's quite a specific, obviously, issue that's occurring there on site. It will obviously depend on what it is your contract says, but generally, I mean, a variation will be a variation to the form, the quality, or the quantity of the works that you're being asked to provide. I mean, without seeing your contract, I would think that having to, if there is an obligation on the employer or there's a legitimate expectation that you are going to obtain permanent power for the utilities from a source that's specified in the contract, whether that's in the specification or the BOQ, and it then transpires that you're having to use temporary power, and obviously procuring temporary generators to use the quantities of power that you're going to need. That's quite, in my view, that would probably be quite a big change, because the nature and circumstances in which it's been provided, is being changed, and there's going to be obviously a large cost associated with that. Unfortunately, it sounds like you're doing what you're meant to do under your contract in terms of submitting a variation and complying with the notices. But unfortunately, it sounds like the employer is just going to push back on that and rely on the original rates for the permanent power. But I would just keep pushing to try and distinguish why it's different and why that was not originally contemplated under the contract and the contract sum that you've provided.
Thank you.
Is there any question? So, we want to thank you, everybody, and hope to see you tomorrow with the new sessions. Thank you.